There are no lies in American politics, and accordingly, it's vitally important for you to understand that men and women are 100% equal. The man on the left is not Chelsea Clinton's father. The man on the right is not Barack Obama's father. Marco Rubio is definitely not a homosexual. His wife is certainly not repulsed by him. And Donald Trump is not a thug. Wait, all of those claims are lies. The one that matters most on this Sunday before Super Tuesday in the election season of 2016 is the fact that Donald Trump, as a result of the hand he was dealt by life and the history of the life he's lived, is necessarily a thug, will remain a thug, will grow worse as a thug. And today we're going to talk about why. This is the disc of Trump, empathy for the thug. So yes, of course, we're talking about disc. I talk about disc an awful lot, have been for the last 2 years, and my understanding grows all the time. I disc everyone all the time, and I'm now to the point where I can get to the dominant characteristic of a person's character at a glance. I don't have to talk to them at all. I just have to see them. I can almost always figure out where someone is driven, incandescent, sociable, or cautious just by looking at them. But there is a second characteristic in almost everyone's disc profile. I call it the subdominant characteristic. And that one takes a little more effort to suss out, but it's extremely interesting in understanding how people will behave. The subdominant characteristic will be one of the other disc types. So, for instance, I am driven and incandescent. I am driven first, very hugely driven, and very strongly incandescent. My wife is sociable and driven. She's extremely sociable, and yet she's relatively high on the D scale also. This is a wonderful profile. I think this is the ideal human profile. It is loving and productive, but loving first and loyal first. Loving and loyal, and yet eminently productive and eminently willing to pitch in to accomplish the goals set forth by the driven personality. That would be me. If a husband in a marriage is driven and sociable, which I am not, I'm driven and incandescent. And if the wife is sociable and driven, then that couple will work very well together as friends, as lovers, as married people, as parents, as a family, as a small business unit, or as a management team in a bigger business. That particular combination will be very, very effective at getting things done in a long-term way, in a way that keeps everyone very happy, very satisfied with the results. But that subdominant characteristic, once you've established the dominant personality characteristic, that subdominant characteristic will illuminate how the person will pursue that dominant motivation. So by being DI, by being driven and incandescent, I am radically different from driven and cautious. The driven cautious personality type is the ideal CEO, from my point of view, is a good leader who is also very efficient at achieving the objectives of the business. This is slow and steady growth, but really good performer as the boss of a business. Driven and sociable is a nice guy boss. Everybody likes working for a DS because the DS will get the job done, but he'll make sure that everyone is happy with the results. DS is the ultimate best leader for functions like military generalship or other endeavors where you really need the ongoing voluntary loyalty and support of the people that you're leading. DI is a prick boss. I freely confess I'm a prick boss. The DI boss is prickly and abrasive, can be very mercurial, will achieve enormous results, whether it's enormous success or enormous failure, almost nothing in the middle. The DC boss will drive the business slowly and steadily toward increasing success. The DS boss will drive the organization quickly or slowly, but toward increasing satisfaction for everyone involved. And the DI boss will make a lot of noise, a lot of big, big noise. There is another factor involved here. I talked about it in Shiley's Delight, the idea of the inbound and the outbound display. Everything that we talk about with DISC reflects display behaviors and value motivations, and I think that every one of the DISC personality types represents the pursuit of unmet needs. That's the reason for the particular configuration in an individual person's personality, is that that person has evolved an empathy strategy for attempting to achieve the satisfaction of unmet emotional needs. And the nature of inbound and outbound displays will be reflected in that DISC profile. And so sociable people will be very much attuned to inbound displays because that's how they take the pulse of the relationship. That's how they know if the relationship is getting healthier or getting less healthy over time, is by the reactions they're getting back from the people that they're interacting with. Sociable people will be very attuned to inbound displays. Driven people will be somewhat less so, because they're driven, because their goal pursuit matters more to them than the relative satisfaction of the people that they're interacting with. Driven people are looking for satisfactorily completed transactions, and so they'll be aware of inbound displays as a way of determining whether or not the social machine is functioning properly. But in many cases, driven people will tend to ignore negative inbound displays and simply concentrate on the positive ones, because some will, some won't, so what? Incandescent people are even less attuned to inbound displays and typically only aware of negative inbound displays. They're looking for nothing but positive inbound displays, and so they treat the positive displays as being functionally normal. That's when the machine is working properly, is when the displays coming inbound are positive, and therefore only rejection displays will tend to register on them. Cautious people are immune, relatively speaking, to inbound displays. And this is all mediated by the subdominant characteristics. So cautious and driven, relatively unaware of inbound displays. Cautious and incandescent, even less aware of inbound displays. And cautious and sociable will be relatively more aware of inbound displays, again, because the sociable need expressed in the subdominant characteristic will take account of inbound displays in order to determine whether or not the social machine is working. There's more. In terms of outbound displays, the outbound display is the way that a particular person announces to the world what values are important to him and how he will go about achieving them. And we will expect to see loop amplification, is what I call it, that every iteration, every transaction is one iteration through the display loop. And obviously, transactions are going on all the time with individual particular people, with different organizations, with different types of organizations, but there are transactions occurring in each individual's human life all the time, and the relative success at achieving the value that's being pursued will determine whether or not that loop is, whether or not that display behavior is amplifying or tamping down per iteration. Someone asked me this week about incandescent displays in the form of things like tattoos and piercings, and this is a real good example of loop amplification, that that kind of bodily display is done in order, as essentially it's a cry for attention. My guess would be the attention of the missing father, the absent father. Um, but it's a cry for attention, so it starts with a tiny little tattoo, maybe in a place that's not all that visible. And when that display fails, when it fails to get the required attention, which might not be a positive response, might not be, wow, what a great tattoo. It might instead be a negative response, don't you ever do that again. But whatever response is being elicited by getting the tattoo, if that response is not forthcoming, then we will expect to see a bigger tattoo and possibly a more visible place, or a more outrageous tattoo, or a body piercing, or something like that. We'll see it with young girls trying to get their father's attention, that they will dress sluttier and sluttier over the course of months. You'll watch a girl's attire becomes sluttier and sluttier while she's desperately, desperately trying to get her father to say, you will not leave this house dressed like that. And if her father's not there, then he can't possibly say that. And so the amplification will continue until she's practically naked, until she's subject to arrest. This is the way amplification works. It's not a happy thing. That in breaking down the disc hierarchy, we can see that a driven person who is not getting the response that he expects from his displays will get busier through each iteration of the loop. A incandescent person will get louder through each iteration through the loop. Sociable person will get sweeter, will try to be more and more affectionate through each iteration of the loop, and cautious person will become stricter, more exactingly demanding of strict compliance through each iteration of the loop. You've seen this happen a zillion times. The highly cautious teacher who can't gain control of the classroom gets louder and louder and louder until he snaps a ruler on the desk. I mean, literally snaps it in half in a display of rage because his compliance displays are not working. So, dominant, subdominant, inbound, outbound displays, loop amplification. What does this have to do with Donald Trump? Well, let's take a look at three big-name politicians who are all still on the public stage in one way or another. All of these guys are incandescents. They are deeply, deeply needy of public acclaim, which is one of those characteristics we expect to see in politicians anyway. This is extremely common among politicians, is that they are hugely inadequate in the way they feel about themselves, and therefore they must demand public acclaim for accomplishments that aren't really theirs, but that they want to lay credit to, like Al Gore inventing the internet. But our three little eyes are all extremely father-hungry men. They all grew up in situations where they had big reason to doubt their father's love, affection, approbation, approval, pride in their sons. The first one I would name is Bill Clinton, who plausibly doesn't even know who his father is. It's arguable, as with Chelsea Clinton we saw earlier in the picture with Webb Hubbell, looks so much like Webb Hubbell and looks nothing at all like Bill Clinton. It's plausible to me that Bill Clinton's father is Oni Madden, the New York crime boss who got kicked out of New York and who ended up in Hot Springs, Arkansas, where Bill Clinton's mother was working at that time as a hostess, as we say. The fact that Bill Clinton, an ordinary, needy, fat doofus who played saxophone in the marching band, ended up a Rhodes Scholar, ended up Harvard Law, ended up governor of Arkansas, ended up president of the United States. I mean, basically, a guy who was built to be a used car salesman ends up president of the United States. How does that happen? Oni Madden is a good bet. But in any case, Bill Clinton is incandescent and sociable. He's an IS. And this is why he was so effective as a politician, that people believe in his sociability. They believe that he cares about them. He doesn't actually, but he's good at convincing them that he does. And he really is, does betray a whole lot of sociable characteristics. He does feel your pain. Barack Obama, whose father may or may not be Frank Marshall Davis, who certainly looks a lot more like Frank Marshall Davis than he looks like Barack Obama Sr., obviously grew up without a father, grew up with a stepfather in Malaysia, was ripped away from that stepfather and parked with his grandfather in Hawaii, but spent his formative years with Frank Marshall Davis, who indoctrinated him in Marxism. Davis was a Marxist. And again, we have a young man better situated than Clinton, but still not terribly well situated, who somehow or another manages to move from Occidental College to Columbia, goes from Columbia to Harvard Law, gets a job as a constitutional law professor, even though he demonstrated no acumen for any sort of law, much less constitutional law, elected senator from Illinois, and suddenly is elected president. How does this happen? Again, I'm looking to a connected father, not an involved father, not a loving father, but a father with connections who could make things happen. And this again argues for Frank Marshall Davis. But Obama is, I see, he is incandescent and cautious. And frankly, this is one of the things that makes him relatively safe as president. Clinton is relatively safe as president because his leadership is based in mutual consent. Obama's leadership is relatively safe in the sense that he always wants to hew to the proper order of things, even when he's deliberately violating the law, deliberately abusing the Constitution. Nevertheless, he wants to portray it as being in accordance with the way the laws are written. The third politician that I want to cite is Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, oh, he had a father at home. This is one of those things you always hear. I use the term underfathered as opposed to unfathered because there can be a father at home, or there can be a father figure involved in a boy's life or child's life. There can be things that you can point to that you could say, oh, well, no, that child is not unfathered. Well, it's not a matter of being unfathered. It's a matter of being underfathered. And Trump was clearly underfathered in his youth because he was a bully who engaged in very outrageous bullying behaviors, very outrageous class clown kind of behaviors. And we see an amplification loop in that. 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, Trump going through this amplification loop, trying desperately to get his father's attention and failing. And in each failure, he got more aggressive. The loop was amplified. He got louder with each failure until he did something. Did he hit a teacher? I truly don't know what the cause was, but that's a story that I've heard, is that he hit a teacher and his father shipped him off to military school. The ultimate paternal rejection. He had a father at home. His father was neglectful. When the consequences of that neglect amplified to the point that they were no longer tolerable, the father shunned him. Fred Trump shunned Donald Trump. And everything has gotten worse for Trump since then. Trump's amplification loop has never stopped. Just as with the little tattoo that turns into giant holes in earlobes, or total body tattoo, Trump has persistently amplified his aggressive displays, his ugly bullying displays, throughout his whole life. Now it's completely pointless. His father is deceased, and yet the displays continue to amplify. This is why Trump is a thug. But the three types there, IS, IC, ID, of those three, the ID is the one that is potentially the most dangerous. The style of leadership that an IS expresses, this is false leadership. This is all prom king leadership, and it's not true king leadership, in other words. True leadership is only done by driven personalities, in the sense that people will only follow driven personalities, will only follow them without rancor or resentment. And obviously, the DS is the one who is best at leading without rancor or resentment. But when you find incandescence in leadership positions, it's because there is some kind of irrational leadership hierarchy that makes it possible for the incandescent to take over. And so in Clinton's case, it's a matter of consensual electoral politics. Clinton's leadership is based on the consent of the people who follow him. They agree because they believe he cares about them, they agree to follow him. Obama's irrational leadership is based on compulsion. He is a cautious personality. He believes in the power of compulsion. He believes in the power of coercion. And the people who are in his thrall because they fear the consequences of rebellion. Trump's leadership is based on social pecking order. The idea that I am above you in the pecking order and therefore I am permitted, licensed to reject you, and you are not in your turn licensed to reject me. Trump is the irreproachable. This is the ultimate prom king. If we imagine a high school social hierarchy, Clinton, as the leader of the high school social hierarchy, would be a very weak, indulgent, and tolerant leader because he needs to maintain positive social interaction with the people who are following him. Obama would be the class president, putatively empowered to do all sorts of things, but practically speaking, really without any sort of power, because as soon as he attempts to enforce his power, he meets with universal, uniform rebellion. Trump is the true prom king in the sense that his social dominance, his ability to maintain his dominance over his followers, consists of his ability to peremptorily reject them in such a way that they become untouchable. That if you are rejected by the prom king, you are not just one down, you are all the way down. You are down to the ground, you are down to the bottom, and everyone all of a sudden will turn on you. This is the bully on the playground, exactly the same phenomenon. And again, here we have Trump, the bully on the playground, the bully who leads the taunt that everyone chants in unison in order to avoid having the mob turn on them. This is the monster in action. This is what the clueless scientists who truly do not understand empathy call sociopathy or malignant narcissism. This is the monster in action. The IC profile can turn into the monster where the ability to escape the social machine is essentially completely blocked, as in North Korea. An IC leader can become a cautious tyrant if escape is impossible. An ID leader doesn't need that physical barrier to escape because he has a perfect social barrier to escape in the form of the ability to reject people in such a way that they cannot recover from that rejection. They become untouchable. That sort of irreproachability is very fragile, which is a wonderful thing. It is very fragile. We saw it the other night in the debate where Marco Rubio in particular managed to put Trump on tilt. And I've recommended the much better way of putting Trump on tilt is to go after him and his relationship with his father, because that rejection by his father when he was 13 or 14 years old is what still burns in the man. It's what makes him the thug that he is. If any of the people who purport to want to stop Trump from becoming president of the United States really do want to stop him, that's the way to do it, is to go after that deep, extreme, incurable father hunger that the man displays in his thuggish behavior. But this is why Donald Trump is the thug that he is, why he can't refrain from being the thug that he is, and why he is extremely vulnerable, even though he seems so potent, so powerful. He is extremely vulnerable because the irreproachable is only one misstep away from becoming the untouchable himself. And if you want to stop Donald Trump from becoming the thug who destroys the American idea, you have to turn him into that untouchable. I have so much more to say about this. it would be gratifying to me if anyone other than a few people around the world were listening to me, listening and learning. But I'm learning regardless, and I will continue to do so. This is the Church of Splendor. My name is Greg Swan. I'm so glad you could join me. I look forward to talking to you again soon.